Hey everyone, this is Kevin from thechesswebsite.com, and today I wanted to make another video on a chess tactic. I have the honor of playing chess with a lot of you, and I've had a lot of games that y'all have sent me that I've analyzed. I can't analyze all of them obviously, but I have been able to look at a lot of different games people have sent me. And there's a lot of different themes and tactics that I see people mess up a lot. So I'm going to be going over some of those just to help improve little small points of your game, just to make sure that you don't make the same mistake over and over. But one of them is when to pin down a knight and how to develop your bishop properly. And a lot of times it's very common, many times you'll see a bishop being developed and you pin down this knight. As you can see here, once this d pawn moves, this knight's going to be pinned down to this king. A lot of times as well you'll see a bishop pinning down the knight to a queen. Even in this example here, I'm just going to do a few moves. If the pawn moves to d6, and let's say we castle, we can also develop to knight to c3. A lot of different moves. What I want to focus here on, a lot of times bishop will come down to g4. This is very common that you see, and it's not a bad thing, but I do just want to point out, as you can see here, this light square bishop is pinning down this knight to the king here, and this bishop here on g4 is pinning down this knight to this queen here on d1. And it's very common. A lot of people like to, when they develop their bishops, always pin down a knight to something. They feel like it's being active, and so they feel like it's what they have to do. Now again, this isn't a bad thing, but I do want to caution you, there are some times that you want to make sure that you don't develop your bishop and pin down the knight. And that's what we're really going to talk about today. Take a look at this example from White here, and as you can see, White would like to be active. He's already started to try to be active on the queen side here, and really he wants to try to find a move to do here. Now, I'm not really going to talk about his setup that he has here, but I do want to say a lot of players from here, they don't think that e2 or d3 is very active, and so they really want to get their bishop involved. And a lot of players here I see will bring their bishop to g5 because they think that when they develop their bishop, they need to develop it and pin down this knight. As you can see here, we have a little problem. This knight here is being defended by this bishop, and the key problem that we see is our bishop is undefended. So what black can do, hopefully you can see it here, is black can play the move knight takes on d5. Now, as you can see here, if we take this bishop on e7, then the knight can come back and take on e7, and White is down a pawn in material from that exchange. And there's no real place that White can play that's going to be good. After the knight takes on d5, if we take this knight here on d5 with either of our pawns, or even our knight here, then the bishop's going to come down and take this bishop on g5. Because again, this bishop on g5 is unprotected. So even if we try knight takes on d5, then he's going to come down and take our bishop on g5. As you can see here, black won a pawn up in material. And that's definitely not what we want to do. In the middle game is we're trying to figure out which side's going to be aggressive and how the rest of the game's going to go. So keep in mind here, although it's White's move and you do want to get your bishops involved, your other minor pieces, develop them correctly, you always want to make sure if you're pinning down a knight that you're pinning it down to a piece that's not going to end up losing you material. Now if we didn't have this pawn here on d5, then it wouldn't be so bad. So if it's an open game and you bring your bishop to g5, that's one thing. But if you have, in this case, a pawn on d5 or another piece on d5, knowing that this knight can come to d5 and still defend this bishop on e7, you definitely don't want to bring your bishop to g5 trying to pin down this knight on f6. Let's take a look at our last example, and as here you can see that black right now is pinning down White's knight on f3 to the queen on d1. Now White really wants to alleviate this pin, so he's going to bring his bishop to e2. As you can see here, black originally did not develop his bishop to g4 with this bishop here on e2, so he didn't go against the cardinal rule. But keep in mind, even though he was pinning this knight down, the bishop is now on e2, so he's going to have to do something. And this is where I see a lot of players make mistakes later on in the game. Not just the development move bishop themselves, but later on they really don't know what to do once they see the bishop come to e2, because a lot of players want to bring their bishop to g4, but they don't want to trade off on knight to f3, and so they get kind of lost in confusion. Now black really needs to keep in mind that this is the same setup that we talked about before. We have this pawn here on d4 now that the knight can attack and still defend this bishop. So we really need to, if we're going to move along in development, we really need, if we want to keep our bishop here on g4, we need to defend this. We could bring our bishop to, or excuse me, our queen to d7. We could bring our knight to f6, but we want to avoid moves like pawn to g6, trying to fianchetto our bishop to the g7 square and then castle on the king side. It's a move like this that's really going to get you in trouble, because now, as we talked about before, the knight can now come to knight takes on d4, and we're going to go up in material. Now black has a few options. He can take our bishop on e2 and we retake with our knight, or if he wants to, he can take with his knight, but then again we take his bishop on g4. Again, as you can see, it was very important that we defended our bishop on g4, but instead we played a move like g6, which was, it may have looked good because you're like, okay, I'm going to fianchetto my bishop and I'll, then castle on the king side and I'll be really safe. But you really need to keep in mind that once white played bishop to e2, we need to, before we have king safety, we need to figure out how not to lose material. So as you can see here, coming back, this is going to be bad for black. Instead of playing pawn to g6, as soon as we see this pawn to e2, or excuse me, bishop to e2, we really need to have a different game plan. So I know this is minor, but hopefully this will help some of you out as far as when you're pinning down a knight. First, when not to, and more importantly, if you are pinning it down, just something to think about if you ever do see this bishop come to e2, or it doesn't have to be e2, it can be another square as well, but if you're pinning it down and then this bishop comes here, to make sure that one, either your bishop is being protected, or two, that you don't have a piece or a pawn here on d4 in this situation. Obviously the pawn on e5 doesn't really matter, because when his knight takes, his knight can't defend this bishop on e2 as well. So hopefully this will help you. Every little bit in your chess game that you can improve will really help you overall. So hopefully all these middle game tactics and strategies that I'm going over, some may seem kind of minor to you, but hopefully when you put them all together in your chess game and you start to see these things over and over, that it will really help you improve your total game. So if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel, and I will see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.